What can change the nature of a man is a question that comes up very often in Planescape Torment. What's going on, everybody? My name is Mortem, this time bringing you a review after 100% of Planescape Torment, specifically the Enhanced Edition, though this does of course apply to every version of the game as well, really. But the Enhanced Edition is the one you can actually 100%, so here we are. So, just a fun aside, real quick. Planescape Torment is low-key the reason this entire channel exists. It is one of the first CRPGs I played, and I picked an amazing one to start with. This game has single-handedly one of the best stories in video games that I've ever experienced. Don't worry, I have some bad things to say too, but I do want to mention, just right off the bat, that bit of bias here. This is one of the first CRPGs I actually ever played. It was originally released in 1999. The Enhanced Edition was released in 2017 by publisher and developer Beamdog, who handles most of the old Infinity Engine games' Enhanced Editions to make them more compatible with modern hardware. You can currently buy this Enhanced Edition of Planescape Torment on Steam for like $20. But as I mentioned, it was one of the first CRPGs I played, which was not the Enhanced Edition at the time, obviously. But that said, it was much later than the game actually released, which was in 1999. But this game's story was so powerful to me that I was like, I need to know everything there is to know about this genre of games, and I need to know it yesterday. It is one of the first games I ever chose to 100%. Not literally the first by any means, but it was definitely what started my trend of 100%ing more of them. But that said, it is worth mentioning that at the time of its release, it was actually a bit of a flop. Now, everyone who actually played it said it was amazing and everything. However, it did not sell well at all. It reviewed very well. It did not sell well. But like a select few video games, has found its second life, so to speak, as a cult classic of today. I'm not going to cover the story in any great depth, but just to give a quick plot setup, you are the Nameless One. You are a person who is immortal as long as your body survives. That is to say, isn't like burnt entirely into nothing. You will eventually recuperate from your death, which is why you wake up in a mortuary and are immediately accosted by a flying skull who explains some of this to you. You waking up in this mortuary, your goals after the skull kind of converses with you and reads a tattoo on your back, kind of explaining the situation a bit. Your goal is to recover your memories, learn about your past lives, and why you are the way that you are, that is to say, immortal. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not going to cover the story in this in any great depth, simply because you should play this game, if nothing else, just to experience the story. The game itself is admittedly a bit dated in some parts, even with the Enhanced Edition. The Enhanced Edition makes it very playable, and if nothing else, a single playthrough for the story is well worth it. Now, when we start a new game, we will actually get a character creation screen, sort of. We are the Nameless One, which is a set person with a set appearance and everything. However, we will get to allocate stats still, which is based kind of on the Dungeons & Dragons bit. However, it's worth mentioning that when you're allocating these, there isn't really a lot of combat in this game, and the combat is 9 out of 10 usually avoidable. Moreover, you will start as a fighter class every time. Later in the game, you can change that to mage or thief at will. At the start of the game, you will be a fighter. So if you wanted to try to focus on combat a bit more, you could do your standard like strength and constitution and everything. However, you might want to consider things like charisma, because again, this is a game that tends to encourage avoiding combat, and moreover, it is very dialogue heavy. So charisma goes a long way. For the next section, I want to talk about world building as well as some of the improvements that the Enhanced Edition made. So right off the bat, the Enhanced Edition added like a little tutorial section, but not exactly. It just gives you like a big heads up tutorial thing that kind of explains what all the buttons do and is fairly helpful. Just overall, we get the increased resolution, so you can play it on a better resolution than the 640 by 800, I believe, that it was originally released at. And those things just by themselves make the game much more approachable for an audience 22 years later. But for the world building itself, the game primarily takes place in Sigil, known as the City of Doors, so to speak, and Sigil is from Dungeons & Dragons' Planescape setting. Sigil itself is a very interesting city, and there are literally entire videos made just about the city of Sigil, which, by the way, you should check out Mr. Rex's video about the city of Sigil. It's really good. Essentially, the crux of it is, Sigil has a portal to basically everywhere if you know how to access it, which is why it's known as the City of Doors. From Sigil, you can get basically anywhere if you have the knowledge and know-how of how to do it. Moreover, gods aren't allowed in Sigil, because this being Dungeons & Dragons, and especially the Planescape setting, gods are known quantities. They're not allowed in Sigil because the ruler, so to speak, of Sigil, the Lady of Pain, is powerful enough to make sure they're not allowed to set foot there. The Lady of Pain has a very strict set of rules that she imposes on anything in Sigil. And you're often told as you go through the game, it's best to avoid her gaze, because she might do what they often refer to as mazing you, which is to say she teleports you to one of her mazes, which just kind of serves as a punishment and a warning at the same time. Basically, if you break the rules that she has put in place, she will maze you once, and then if you escape that maze, which is possible, though difficult, and break her rules again, she just flat out kills you. Although sometimes she will just jump straight to killing you. At any rate, to see Sigil and a lot of its concepts brought to life, like the idea of its portals and the Lady of Pain, as well as all of these races and cultures of the multiverse of D&D, brought forth in Dungeons & Dragons in this way is really well done. I liked it a lot. Sigil is not the only location in the game by any means, but it is easily the best. It was really cool. That said, this is a good time to mention that this game is going to have you up to your eyeballs in dialogue. Playing through this game is essentially reading a book because there is so much dialogue. Once you've played through it a few times, it's pretty easy to skip through most of it because you pretty much know what everybody says, but that first time, especially if you're just playing for the story, be prepared. It is a lot of reading. And that brings us to the combat section of this video. So the combat in this game kind of sucks, so there's just no easy way to put it. As I mentioned, you start as a fighter, and that's pretty much the easiest way to play the combat, is to just be a fighter. But you will ultimately control a party of 6 if you get enough of the companions recruited. They do have a simple AI that you can turn on or off. It is specific to each character. You don't really do anything with it, can't customize it, anything like that. Combat is not really the focus of the game, and it shows simply because the combat is just straight up not very good. Most of the encounters in the game can be avoided. There's a few that can't. There are some places where you will have to fight. However, most of the time you can avoid the combat situations. So I mentioned companions and recruiting them, so let's talk about them for a minute. In total, you can get up to 7. The first couple are pretty much unmissable, though several of them are actually missable if you just don't talk to them. Now, Mort is the floating skull that awakens you in the mortuary when the game begins. Then you have Anna from the Shadows. She is a tiefling rogue that you meet later in the game, again, kind of as part of the main story. She's in a place you have to go, you get introduced to her. There is typically everybody's favorite, Falls from Grace, which is a succubus in the brothel of slaking intellectual lust. She actually runs the place, and it is a brothel where they deal in conversation rather than the typical use of a brothel. There is Dakan. He is a Gith Sarai. There is Ignis, a former apprentice of one of your previous lives. There is Valor, who is essentially an enchanted suit of armor devoted to justice. And there is Nordum, who is a Modron cube. They're a unique race to Dungeons & Dragons that are pretty interesting. That one is very easily missed. But the crux of the companions is that they're all bound to the Nameless One, either through your previous incarnations. For instance, again, Ignis was one of your apprentices. Dakan, the Githzerai, was actually tricked into vowing himself to you until you die, which, as someone who can't die, poses a bit of a problem for Dakan. And then there's others who are just sort of influenced by you and bound to you through their own personal torment. For instance, Mort follows you around because it turns out he's responsible for some of your previous incarnations' deaths. and he feels bad about it, so he follows you. Now, this is as good a place as any to mention that every time your character dies and is resurrected, the personality of that particular incarnation often changes because this character can't remember anything and you have to recover your memories, which means their personality is often in flux. Now I'm going to talk some negatives and then some positives and then kind of wrap this up. So the negatives are pretty straightforward. The combat is rough. The inventory is also pretty bad, but who's really surprised about that? Now, truth be told, a lot of the dialogue could have been cut out from this game and probably would have given it the same experience. Like, oftentimes you can talk to some NPCs that don't really have much to do with anything, and they will still talk your ear off. And it's like, why is this conversation here if it serves no purpose? So there's a lot of dialogue like that they could have easily cut out, but nonetheless, here we are. So, positives. As I mentioned, the story is amazing. The story itself is more about what happens to your character and understanding why he's immortal, his past incarnations and what's happened to him, and moving forward out of this endless cycle that he's caught in, than it is about, say, saving the proverbial world. Also, like I mentioned, the Enhanced Edition adds tons of quality of life stuff that genuinely just make it a much funner game to play and a more enjoyable experience. And the final positive I want to leave people with is that this game nailed building your own character, which sounds like a weird thing to say, but when you look at some of these dialogue options for responses and things like that, even though you are playing the nameless one, you get to shape this person's personality. And in shaping this character's personality, you're going to answer that question, what can change the nature of a man? And in the end, the answer to that question is simply, whatever you believe can change the nature of a man, can. So, while it does have a few negatives, Planescape Torment is an absolute classic of an RPG. You should definitely pick up the Enhanced Edition for $20 and at least play through it one time. It will be well worth your trouble, even with the pain points that come with the game, because there are a few. This is genuinely a masterpiece of storytelling, and is, in terms of story, hands down one of my favorite games of all time. So, with that out of the way, guys, truly, thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.